Hi, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. I'm your host, Becca. I'm a certified personal trainer, holistic health coach, and future chiropractor on my way to figuring out this thing we called life. Now, let's get babbling. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. This podcast is going to be all about how you're going to finally accomplish that reading goal that you have. I know for me, I am not that fast of a reader. And I kept using that excuse to say that I would never finish like 12 books in a year. I thought that was something I could never possibly do in my entire life. And I actually did it last year in 2024, which I am extremely proud of myself for actually doing that because I didn't think it was actually possible. And I'm going to give you guys some tips and ways to actually accomplish that reading goal that you have. Now, I feel like most people say they want to read a certain amount of books because they just want to make reading a habit. And it seems simple enough to just read 12 books out of the year. And for someone who is a slower reader like myself, reading 12 books in a year just felt extremely daunting. And I just want to tell you that it is possible, even from a person who is a slow reader. And I sometimes don't even like to call myself a slow reader because if you've ever heard of Jim Quick, he always talks about how the words that you say are important. And he himself even called himself a slow reader and thought he couldn't read a ton of books. And he has a lot of insight into how to become a faster reader. But sometimes I don't even want to have to be a faster reader. I just want to create reading as a habit and something that is enjoyable, which I get people who read fast, it tends to be enjoyable for them too. But sometimes when I push myself to like the extreme of like I have to read extremely fast and I have to like get better at this, then it takes out all the fun out of just learning and getting better at reading. So I want to just start off by saying some of my favorite books so then you guys can get some ideas on what to read because sometimes it's like I don't even know what to read, or like if you're anything like me, I will put on Goodreads all of the books that I want to read or that everyone says, and then I never end up actually picking anything to read because there's so many books that I could read, but I don't know which one's going to be the best one. So then I don't even end up picking a book. So I'm going to give you guys some ideas on books that you can read. And I would say my favorite nonfiction book that I read was probably Bigger, Better, Bolder by Jennifer Cohen. It was all about just kind of like what it says, living bigger, better, and bolder, and taking really bringing out your own confidence within yourself and believing in what you can do. It was definitely more of those like hype you up sort of books. And it was I actually listened to this book. So it was nice to actually listen to this book because she actually read it herself and it felt like a helpful motivational podcast, but in book form. So if you're looking for a nonfiction book, I highly recommend that one. And then this year, fiction wise, I actually really got into a lot of Colleen Hoover books this year. I think it was a little bit because me and my mom both got into Colleen Hoover and we were able to talk back and forth about it. So I had quite a few of those, but that honestly wasn't even my favorite book. I would have to either say Iron Flame or Divine Rivals. And I'm not on Book Talk or anything, but I know Iron Flame had a lot of talk and a lot of people were saying a lot of things about it. And I just loved it because I thought dragons were really, really cool. And it kind of gave me that like Hunger Games sort of style. So if you haven't read Iron Flame, I will say it is a hefty book. Like it is big. So if it's a little bit intimidating to you, I promise it is worth it because I felt like it was entertaining throughout the entire time. And then Divine Rivals, I'm actually reading the second book or there's like two in the series. So I'm reading that one currently. And I've actually really enjoyed it. I don't really know how to explain it without giving everything away. So I will just say that you have to read it for yourself. But those are some books that you can actually get into, or to just start from. So get that book. You can, while you're listening to this podcast, just like go onto Amazon and like buy them right now on Kindle. But this is kind of what I want to talk about here, is like, how are you going to accomplish those 10 books by the end of the year? Because sometimes it's like, I don't even know how this is possible, especially for someone who reads really slow. And I'm telling you, you can. You can, and it is possible from someone who is a slower reader. And that's first by just picking the format that you want to read on. And it doesn't have to just be this one in particular, but it could be an audiobook, it could be an ebook, could be a physical book. You can do a mix of in between. And I think sometimes I thought in my head that it had to be like, I have to read these books. It only counts if I physically actually read it. And that's just not true. You're still getting the information, either if you're listening to it, if you're physically reading it, it's going to come into your brain some way. It's if you're actually applying it, if you're doing a nonfiction book, if you're actually applying what you're reading. But it also could just be for enjoyment. It's okay to listen to an audiobook while you're doing chores and working out or driving. There's nothing wrong with that. And I just had to kind of take my ego down and say, like, this does count towards my 12 books a year, and that's fine. Some seasons are busier in my life, but the fact that I'm going out of my way to read something or listen to something, it doesn't change the fact that I am adding books to the books that I read that year. I'm just reading with my ears, is how I would put it. And some apps that I like to use, of course, there's Audible, but also Libby is a really great app if you have a local library and you're signed up to that. Libby has ebooks, but it also has audiobooks, and they typically have like a decent amount of books there, because sometimes I know some library apps where it's like it takes forever to even just get like a Harry Potter book, and you're like, well, what's the point? All the good books are on hold for forever. Libby actually does a pretty good job about like having enough books and popular books in your library. So maybe check that out if you are with your local library. And then, of course, there's like ebooks on Kindle that you can use. You can actually have a physical Kindle, or I think sometimes some people don't realize that you can just download the Kindle app and read it on your phone or your iPad. I like having an actual physical Kindle because it allows me to have less of a temptation to go onto other apps or like text someone or decide to do something else besides reading. When I have an actual Kindle in front of me, I'm able to just solely focus on my Kindle. Plus, also, I like to read before bed. And so I'm able to take the brightness all the way down. And so that's helpful with a Kindle. But either way, you can use a Kindle app. And what I like about that is you can highlight, make notes. And then what's really cool is then those notes get synced into like, it turns into like a PDF, or not a PDF, sorry, an Excel sheet. And then you can go in later and see what notes you made or what you highlighted. And if you're anything like me and you have a podcast, or you just like want to say cool things that you learned from different books and stuff like that, you can just go into those notes and kind of keep a file of all those notes that you've read. So that's really cool. And then, of course, there's like the physical book that you can always read. I always thought, or I don't want to say always, but when I first got into reading, I felt like the Kindle was amazing, and all I was going to do was read on my Kindle, and that was it. And then recently, I think it was when I was reading more Colleen Hoover books, my mom likes to read more of like on a physical book. And so we would switch books back and forth. And when I was actually reading a physical book, I was like, you know what? When people say physical books are nice, I think this is what they're talking about. And so I feel like I go back and forth. I feel like if it is a big book, I like reading it on a Kindle because it's less daunting. And also it's just easier to hold and carry around everywhere. But then if I have an actual book and it's like smaller, I'd say probably 300 pages is like a pretty decent sized book to where it's like not too much. I feel like after 300, then they start getting pretty bulky. Those are like nice ones to have just like right in front of you and gives you that whole like wood cabin book vibes, which I love. So either way, just go audiobook, ebook, Kindle app, or a physical book. And it's okay to pick from either format. You don't have to strictly stick with one. Now, the next thing is probably like actually making this reading into a habit. And you're just going to have to set aside time. Like when you try and make a habit, you have to be intentional about it because humans are really good about doing the same thing over and over and over again. But once we disrupt what we're used to doing, it's really hard to get into that habit or to continue the thing that you're disrupting because that takes that whole like activation energy where you're like, wait, hold on. I used to go on my phone, but now I'm going to do this instead. Or I used to watch TV before bed, but now I'm going to read a book. So when you add it on to things that you're used to doing, it makes it a little bit easier, but you are still going to have to be a little bit more intentional when it comes to your reading habit. So this is where I like to read before bed. It could even just be like 10 or 15 minutes. And then sometimes you might even just get to that really exciting part of the book and you wake up that next morning and you're like, all I just want to do is read my book the next morning. Or maybe you're like at the end of the day and all you can think about is how you want to read your book. But just doing 10 or 15 minutes before bed every day and making that a habit will not only be better for you because you're making reading a habit, but it will be better for your sleep too, which is awesome. I got an Aura ring for Christmas, so I've been like nerding out all with like the data that it's giving me and seeing how different things are affecting my sleep or even my readiness for the next day. And sadly, I had to come to terms with the fact that watching TV before bed, even if I have my blue blocker glasses on, I actually get less deep sleep than when I read a book before bed. And when I get more deeper sleep, I find for me that I feel more refreshed and rejuvenated, and I'm able to be focused in my podcast and be more energetic and lively, and actually be able to check off all the goals, or I don't want to say goals, but like all the things that I have on my to-do list that I know I can do, but sometimes when you feel like you get sleep, it just feels even harder. And when I get enough deep sleep, I actually find that it's easier for me to go from one thing to the next and knock everything out. So I've been trying to use that more as motivation to read before bed instead of watching TV, but I will say I'm still human. It happens sometimes, but I still want to continue that habit of at least reading 10 minutes before bed because I get to sleep even faster and better sleep. Now, you could even also just like set aside time on a weekend and read in the morning for like 30 minutes to an hour and kind of like treat it as an appointment towards yourself, where it's like, this is my time for dedicated learning or just having fun and reading a fun book. And this could be like your relaxing you time where you just get your morning coffee and your tea, because I know I probably wouldn't have gotten coffee. I would have gotten tea. You get your morning tea and you're sipping it and it just feels so good. Like right now, I'm looking outside and it was snowing. There's still snow on the roof and it feels, there's just something so aesthetic with having a cup of tea, reading in the morning and having snow outside. So maybe take advantage of that like winter time right now and start setting aside that time in the morning or in the evening to read for like 30 minutes to an hour and make it fun. Like set that vibe and it will make it easier for you to actually create that habit. But it doesn't even have to be like a dedicated time that you do things, because sometimes some people are like, I don't want to like make it so rigid, and that's fine. I've even tried to change my mindset on like when I have extra time, grab my book. Make it easy to just grab your book, and that's the first thing that you do instead of just grabbing your phone or turning on the TV. Or sometimes, to be completely honest, when I don't know what to do, I'll just like pace around and kind of just be like, what am I doing? I'm in the universe, but I don't know what I'm doing. It happens. But when I have extra time, just grab my Kindle and start reading until I need to go and do the next thing. It literally just happened to me today where I got all my studying done earlier than what I thought I would have gotten done, which is great. I can just go and read. I can read my fun book and finish that instead of just being like, okay, what's the next thing that I need to do, or what am I supposed to do right now, or like should I just scroll on my phone and like mindlessly scroll because I don't know what else to do right now. Just grab your book and read. It's okay, even if it's for 5 minutes, because you got to like go out the door. When I first got my Kindle, I would like carry that thing around everywhere. I still kind of do. I always have it in my backpack. Um, but maybe just the fact of you carrying it around, whether that be your book or your Kindle, or if it's on your iPad, whatever, the fact that you're just carrying it around, it gives you that option to just pick up the book. And you just have to remember that you are a reader. And just because you are slower at reading doesn't discount the fact that you are a reader and you can get better at this reading habit. And I know for me, sometimes I would tell myself that, like, I need to read this book and then I need to be done with this book. But that is the furthest thing from the truth. I think the way that I was able to stay engaged with the book that I was actually reading was actually reading multiple books at the same time. Now, typically, I'll do at least like one nonfiction and one fiction book. Maybe I'll do two nonfiction and a fiction book, but typically I want to keep them like out of the same category because I feel like if you have more than two fiction books, at least for me, it gets a little overwhelming, especially if you're like reading those books where it has a ton of plot building and world building. It just gets too much and I forget which characters in which book. So having at least two books at the same time, that way when you're just like, I just want to kind of get out of the world right now and get into my own little universe, you just read your fun fiction book. But then maybe you feel more like, you know what, I really want to learn about the importance of breathing. I'm going to read that book, aka I want to read the book called Breath. I've had a lot of people recommend that book, so that is a one that I have on the top of my mind right now. But I have to finish my other one first. And so having those two books are going to give you that ability to just, based off your mood and the way that you're feeling, isn't going to dictate if you're going to read or not, because you have more than one option to actually read. And just because you're not going to get that one book done that month doesn't mean that maybe next month you'll end up having two books done by the end of that month. So it's the whole thing of like at the end of the year you'll get 12, and it's okay if one month gets 0 and the next month gets 2. It's totally fine. It allows you to actually follow your interest and not force you to do something just because you told yourself, I have to read this book. Which, speaking of following your interest, read books that you enjoy. It's great that someone recommends a book to you and you decide to read it. But if you don't like it, put it down. It's okay to not finish that book. If you're just not feeling a book, I typically give a book about like 100 pages in if I picked it. But if someone else recommends it to me, I at least give it like halfway through the book. And then from there, if I'm still just like, meh, you can choose a different book. Choose what you want to read, not what's popular on Book Talk or wherever you get your book interest from. Now, the next way that you can make reading an easier habit is by building some sort of social component when it comes to your reading habit. Talk to your friends about the books that you're reading. This keeps you accountable by you just talking about the books that you're reading and seeing what you're interested in, and then maybe you might end up wanting them to read the book as well. You could even just start a book club or go to a book club and do some sort of like friendly competition. I always love some friendly competition when it comes to let's see if anyone reads more books than the other one, or just keeping you accountable of like maybe you want to read 12 books this year and your friend wants to read 16, and so you see like who's actually going to accomplish their goal this year. And you can do that by either talking to your friends in person and making this an accountable way of doing something, or you could do it on Goodreads. I love using Goodreads as a way to find new books and like keep track of my reading, but then also just to like see my other friends' book goals for that year, and me being able to see, okay, am I going to be able to get to my my book total of the year, and are they going to as well? And it just keeps you accountable with your actual reading goal when you have other people around you talking about the reading that you are doing. Now, I kind of talked about this next part a little bit before about just like staying consistent with your goal, but just making sure your books are accessible, whether that be in your phone or in your bag. This could even be just on your nightstand. I prefer just like carrying my book around everywhere, and this is why I use a Kindle most of the time. And I will carry this everywhere because then that way it allows me to stay consistent because there is just ease of access. Now, the next way that you could make it easier for you to stay consistent with this goal is just by setting small achievable goals, by just saying, I'm going to read 1 chapter a day, or I'm going to read 10 pages a day. Or this might even just be the like 10 minutes before bed, or I'm going to read for 10 minutes every single day. Easy as that. Make it small and achievable, and then you can always build from there. And that's how you're going to accomplish your 12 books by the end of this year. Even though you may consider yourself a slow reader, I promise you can still read 12 books by the end of this year. I'd love to hear what books you are planning to read this year to get to that 12 books of the year. I'm going to try and read 12 books by the end of this year too. Maybe I should make it a challenge. You know what? If you are going to do this like 12 books by the end of the year challenge with me, I want you to tag me on social media, use hashtag Becca Babble Reads. And I feel like that would be super fun. You tagging me and then using that hashtag. And we're going to see if all of us can read 12 books by the end of this year. And I want to see what books you are reading so we can all get some inspo, like we're going to get some accountability here so all of us slow readers can get to those 12 books by the end of this year. And even if you're not reading 12 books by the end of this year, maybe yours is 6, that's totally fine. I'd still love for you to join this challenge with me, and we are going to read 12 books by the end of this year or achieve whatever book reading goal you have. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening to Becca Babbles podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out. And with all that being said, I can't wait to babble with you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Becca Babbles podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing that you can do is leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other listening platform of your choosing. If you want to learn more about me, you can do that by following me on Instagram at Becca Ann Wellness, or by checking out my blog, freebies, offers, and newsletter on my website at beccaannwellness.com. If you want to share the love of the podcast, you can do that by taking a screenshot and sharing it on social media and tagging me and the podcast at Becca Ann Wellness and using the hashtag Becca Babbles Podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to babble with you next time.